Hi, my name is Ian Gotts. I'm the founder and CEO of Elements.cloud. If you were expecting to see Carlos Sequeira, unfortunately he had a family emergency, so he asked me to step in and talk about supercharging DevOps practices. So I'm delighted to be joining you. We have our entire development team are based in the Ukraine, in Lviv. So we're huge supporters of the Ukrainian economy. So delighted to be presenting here today. What I want to do is talk about DevOps practices, but also then think about the key trends or the implementation trends that we're seeing in the Salesforce ecosystem, and then how that affects your career or how you can start to plan your career. So a little bit about me, 10 years as a consultant. I've been a Salesforce customer for 20 years. Obviously, we're now a Salesforce ISV, so we're a software vendor. And I've been thinking about, engaged in business analysis and business change for the last 30 years. So I think the first thing is that DevOps is actually accelerating dev cycles. I think we're now seeing more and more people talking about DevOps. People have got beyond just using change sets. They're starting to think about the whole ALM, the application lifecycle management process. And Forrester just came out with a report that said, if you use good DevOps practices, it can increase the ROI of your implementation by 307%. So just a staggering number there. And a couple of key metrics: 80% faster to deliver user stories, 80% faster to recover from failures. So it's accelerating the whole of that development cycle from the user story through to release. But the challenge is that the faster we go, the farther we go in the wrong direction. This is a picture of me sailing a hydrofoiling moth. Boats have got faster and faster. You've seen the America's Cup with hydrofoils. But the faster you go, the further you go in the wrong direction. And I think that can often be the case with DevOps. We're accelerating DevOps, but are we developing the systems, the applications, the changes that our business users need, or are we simply delivering what they thought they wanted faster? And that really is about supercharging DevOps. How do we make sure that DevOps is being used in the correct way, and that we genuinely are delivering what the users need way faster, which should obviously increase adoption. So if I think about Google Maps is obviously a major step forward from paper maps, where before we left the house, we got the paper map out, worked out where the route was. If there were any roadblocks, if we ran out of fuel, all of those things need to be planned before we left home. Now with Google Maps, it's aggregating all the different information, traffic patterns, hold-ups, accidents, tells you where the nearest gas stations are. It's aggregating all this information so that we can make course corrections at pace. And so it's basically providing that sort of intelligence about our journey. And I think we need to think about the way that DevOps is working in the same way, that we actually are aggregating all the information about the systems to make sure that even if we've set off in a certain direction and then there's a business change that is required at short notice, or there's a system problem, we can course correct quickly without breaking the org. So really the issue of time to value is idea to adoption. Someone had an idea, someone had some feedback, and getting that into release and then end users using it, that's adoption. Quite often when you think about DevOps, you think about user story to release, which is only a subset of the overall implementation lifecycle. So what we're seeing out there with customers and also with consulting partners is that DevOps needs to be combined with something that's being described now as change intelligence, to make sure the implementation is going in the right direction. But as I said, you can make course corrections at pace with confidence. So it's that intelligence quotient that we're adding on top of DevOps. And that's really what I want to talk about in terms of how we're supercharging DevOps. So if I think about a typical implementation lifecycle, clearly it's more complicated than this, but I've tried to make it fairly simple. And I mean, the first box there, validate requirements. You have feedback coming in from end users. You have changes coming in, say, from senior executives saying, right, we need to implement CPQ, or we need to implement a new cloud. We have all of that input coming in, and from that we have some requirements. Now those requirements need to be validated and prioritized, and the way we do that is, first of all, looking at the requirements, but secondly, we look at them in the context of the business processes. So we start to look at how the business processes will change, hence the importance of business process mapping and the role of the business analyst. We obviously also need to look at the technical implications, so maybe looking at the entity relationship diagram to look at how we might implement those changes. And whilst we're not developing the full solution, we still need to think about the solution or those requirements in the context of that solution. So that's the first thing, validate requirements. Then we need to define the work items. So you might call it a work item, you might call it a user story. But that user story is the key chunk of work that gets passed across from the analysis into the development team. So we're not yet thinking about DevOps, we're still at the front end in terms of thinking about the analysis. But when we pass that across to the development team, we need to make sure it's not just a simple user story of as a ... I want to ... so that I can. But we've done a lot more analysis which we can add to that to add color, to remove any ambiguity. If we have a simple user story that gets passed to the development team, often if they don't understand the context, they'll go and build something and it's the wrong thing. We've done all that work up front. We've created requirements. We've built process maps. We've understood which metadata items may be changed. We've done all that work up front. We need to pass that across to the development team. So when I think about a user story, I also think about that metadata dictionary so we can then start to understand the risk of a user story. If we can pass the development team a user story with a risk assessment that says, this is easy, this one's going to be complicated, they can then allocate the right resources in the development team, the right development resource, the right testing resource, the right change management resources. So therefore, maybe we can fast track some changes. Other changes which are high risk, maybe they touch third-party systems, there are integrations associated with them, that needs to go through the more rigorous process. So not everything needs to go through the long-winded multiple sandboxes, regression testing process if we know it's low risk. So again, the way to supercharge DevOps, number one is to make sure that we give people the right information. Secondly, we give them a risk assessment so we can actually maybe take some different paths through there. And obviously the result of building and testing and documenting the solution so that when we come back around the loop again with feedback, we can do a better job of impact analysis because we've already got it documented. So that's a very simple process. And if I think about it from the first phase, two phases are about building the right thing. Do we understand what should be built? Have we got from the end users what they really need, not what they thought they wanted? They come to you and say, I need a pick list. And the answer is, well, yes, but do you really need a pick list? Let's look at the process maps and go, okay, actually, the best way to implement this is probably not a pick list. It might be a different record type with a different report and different validation rules. So again, that front-end business analysis is really important to make sure that we're focusing our dev efforts in the correct way. And that enables the development team to build the right thing. So we think about the front end as build the right thing. The second is build the thing right. Make sure that we build it once, we built it exactly as expected, we don't hit any technical problems, we don't have to have any rollbacks. So that first two phases we're calling change intelligence. And that's a combination of all the business analysis, the understanding about what's in the org, the understanding about the risk of all changes. And then obviously the second area is DevOps. So let me spend a little bit of time digging into what change intelligence really means, because it may be a new term, you may not have heard it before. It's a term that's becoming increasingly used by software vendors in the ecosystem, but also business analysts. So what are the benefits of doing something, this approach with change intelligence? As I said, the first one is we're providing the requirements and the change impact to the development team. And the benefits of that are we're reducing rework. That means the development team aren't building something and then having to rebuild it because they actually misunderstood the requirements and built the wrong thing. That obviously accelerates development, because we need to think about development as when it lands with the end users and they are using it, not when we've actually shipped a release. The second thing is making sure that when they're building it, they're building the right things in the right way, so that they make sure they've included all the metadata items. So as an analyst, you're thinking about looking at the metadata dictionary, thinking about what areas of the implementation need to be changed. So therefore, the development team have that obviously the best chance of building the thing correctly. Obviously, we want to try and reduce rework, we want to reduce rollbacks, because that not only does it slow things down, but it also affects the trust of our business users. If we're building things and breaking the system all the time, then the business users are either going to stop asking us to change it, or they're going to use another system. And we obviously don't want that. And as I said, the last point here is that we need to make sure that the development resources are associated with the change risk. So high risk issues, high risk changes go through the most rigorous process, the fast track changes. And again, a change may not necessarily be high risk just because it's changing an object or changing a pick list. It isn't necessarily low risk just because it's changing a report. We need to look at the risk in terms of technical risk, what are the changes that are going to be made, business risk, which is how difficult is this for the business to change, to adopt these new changes, and the last is regulatory risk. So we need to consider all of those when we start passing it through to the development team. And again, those are as information that's associated with that user story. So again, the development team can allocate the right level of resources to a particular area. I think people talk about, oh, well, you can just develop in production. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. What I'm suggesting is that you may fast track some changes if you know that they're low risk. The challenge that everybody has is that they don't really understand the risk because they don't have a clear picture of the metadata implications, the business changes or the regulatory changes. And therefore you have to assume that everything is high risk and therefore everything has to go through the long process in terms of development. So what I'm suggesting is that understanding the risk means that you can fast track things, things get into deployment more quickly. And also, if we understand the risk, then ideally we're reducing the number of rollbacks. So there we go, there are the benefits. Reduced rework, accelerated development, reduced rollbacks. Reduced rework, increased adoption, reduced technical debt, more frequent releases, faster deployment, reduced rollbacks. So all of these benefits are driven by having a well-organized business analysis cycle, building that change intelligence, passing into DevOps. DevOps can't do this alone. The two of those things need to be twinned together. DevOps on its own can do a great job of developing faster, but you don't necessarily increase adoption. You don't necessarily reduce technical debt. You don't necessarily reduce rollbacks. Add change intelligence on top of DevOps, and then suddenly these are the benefits you get. So I've talked a lot about change intelligence. Let's really understand in a bit more detail what that means. So change intelligence starts with an understanding about the metadata. That means pulling all the metadata out of not just Salesforce, but related systems into a metadata dictionary. Now, that needs to be done every night or every time there's a major change. It can't be just pushed into an Excel spreadsheet. The overhead of managing a spreadsheet is too great. And with the metadata APIs now, you can build that metadata dictionary very quickly. You can do that nightly sync. But the other thing you can do with the APIs is you can now build a lot of the documentation. So some of the documentation can be automated. We can tell you what a validation rule looks like. We can tell you how well populated fields are. We can tell you where things are used. So there's quite a lot of processing that we can do behind the scenes to build out that metadata dictionary. So it's not just a list of metadata items, but there's a whole wealth of other intelligence that goes with it. And we like to think about this concept of Impact 360. We need to have a complete view of the metadata so we really understand the implications of making changes. It may not just be where something is used somewhere in Salesforce, but it may be used in Slack, it may be used in MuleSoft, it's used in a third-party system. Just because a field is empty doesn't mean it can be deleted. I can think of at least 5 reasons why you shouldn't delete a field just because it's empty. So we need a more complete picture of our metadata than just a snapshot that says, okay, I've got a list of my metadata, or I know how many fields are populated, or maybe I've got a bit of where used on some metadata items. So this is what we're calling dependency analysis or change impact analysis. And obviously, if we're syncing every night, we can then understand the changes that were made. So suddenly we're building up a history of those changes. So instead of you as the developer or you as the business analyst having to document the changes, they're being documented for you. So again, when you start to do the impact analysis, the next time you go tap that metadata item, a lot of that work's been done for you, and you have a far richer picture. So if you think back to my example of Google Maps is not just a simple map. It's an aggregation of all the information: traffic patterns, accidents, holdups, gas stations, restaurants. The metadata dictionary is not just a list of that metadata, but it's the aggregation of all the things that we can pull together. But it doesn't just stop there. That's what you can do when you build it automatically. But then on top of that, you can then layer in the business analysis assets. You can link feedback back to metadata items, requirements that are going to change them. When you're mapping out your business processes, you can link it back to the key items that are going to get touched. Why is that important? Well, when you go back to make a change, you can look at it and say, okay, when I change this process, these are the metadata items that I need to change. Or come from the other side, which says, I want to go and change this metadata item. What processes use it? Oh, I'm making a change for the sales team. Fantastic, I'm changing an opportunity field. Oh, I didn't realize that the professional services team also use that. If I made that change, I probably would have broken their process. So again, that two-way picture is really valuable. I talked about building data models, entity relationship diagrams. Again, the schema builder inside Salesforce sometimes can be a bit overwhelming, and you just need a subset of those objects in one place. And again, they can be linked back to the metadata dictionary. And again, the key asset that passes from change intelligence to DevOps is that user story. So maybe developed by the business analysts, synchronized into Jira, synchronized into Azure, synchronized into your DevOps solution. But all the things that are attached to it then flow with it. So then the development team are looking at a user story filled out with all that content. But we talked about releases and versioning. When we think about a release in Salesforce terms, we often just think about releasing metadata. But if we've made changes to business processes, we need to release those as well. If we made changes to training material, we need to release that as well. So when we make a release in Salesforce, we need to release all the other things which support the business. We also maybe need to release changes to a compliance model, ISO 27001, Sarbanes-Oxley, ISO 9000. All of these compliance models are part of that change intelligence platform, because when we make a change, we need to understand the implication. Oh, it's ever so easy, we're just going to add a new field. Well, hang on a minute. What's that done to GDPR? What's that done to our ISO 27001 security certification? And if it's all connected, we instantly see the impact. And as I said, if we're making changes and it's a regulated environment, maybe we need people to sign off the business changes, and we need to store that as training records. And finally, a lot of the content we're creating can be reused and repurposed as in-app help. If I've already created information about why a particular field is used or what the values are for a pick list, why not just put those straight into Salesforce and use that as in-app help? Why not put the process maps as in-app help? So we've done the work once as a business analysis team. Let's reuse that as much as possible. And that also means that when end users are passing us feedback, they're passing us feedback in the context of understanding the training they've been given, the processes they're meant to be following, and the Salesforce systems they're meant to be using. Now, I know many of you say, well, that's great, Ian, but actually I've already got a lot of information that we've already built, so I don't want to start all over again. And the answer is absolutely not. You should also be linking your existing content back into that metadata dictionary. Maybe it's screenshots, maybe it's documents sitting in Google or SharePoint or Atlassian or Box. Maybe you've drawn process diagrams in Lucidchart and you're not ready to convert all of those to UPN, Universal Process Notation. Fine, just connect them. If you've got Google Docs, connect them, Quip, and so on. And then obviously we need to connect this back to our DevOps solutions, to Capado, Provar, GearSet, and the other ones like Flowsum, Blue Canvas, and of course the new DevOps Center that's coming out that's been released by Salesforce. Again, there's a key relationship or a key integration there between the user story, or work item as they call it, and the DevOps center. So you can start to see here, this change intelligence platform really is aggregating all the information we've already got. And now, in some cases, for some of you who maybe your implementation methodology is less mature, some of these things you're pulling it out of spreadsheets and putting into one place. For others of you, you've already got a fairly sophisticated implementation methodology, and all I'm doing is I'm just giving a different terminology. Maybe we're injecting that metadata dictionary into it to actually make sure that the rest of the assets you're creating are put in context. So in summary, the change intelligence platform is what drives DevOps faster, what drives DevOps in the correct direction. The two together are really supercharge that implementation lifecycle. As we talked about the benefits earlier, reduced rework, greater adoption, faster deployments, faster release cycles, everything that everybody wants. Particularly as business users now are demanding that the Salesforce system and related applications, whether it's Slack, whether it's NetSuite, Oracle, all of those systems need to change more quickly to support them. If we've learned anything from COVID, it's that those organizations that change most quickly are the ones that win. Now, when COVID first hit, if anybody could get moved to a sort of a digital world, then end users our customers were fairly forgiving. But 2 years on, our end users, our customers expect that the promise from the front end is delivered by the back end systems, which means that we can't just hack together a website. We need to make sure that we're building our back office systems from Salesforce's customer record on back and making sure we're driving them in a consistent way. So the things that I'm talking about now are fundamental to driving really effective businesses. So let me just change tack for a moment to think about 3 implementation trends that we're identifying. And they are, first of all, a center of excellence at the highest level. 91% of the top performing organizations have a center of excellence. And I run a number of center of excellence roundtables where we get experts to come and debate how they set up a center of excellence, the benefits they're getting, how they've approached it. And they've been fascinating. And what we're seeing, it's a growing trend. More and more organizations are putting in place a center of excellence. The level of interest in building a center of excellence is growing. Salesforce is already building training content in the enterprise architecture team around how you establish a center of excellence. So again, an important trend that's happening, and that's an overall trend. There are we talk about 13 different pillars. I'm not going to go through them now, but the 13 different pillars of the center of excellence. And again, if you're interested, you've got my contact details. Ping me an email, and I'll point you at some of the material that we've put together around the center of excellence. That's sort of the overarching piece about how we drive business change, how we drive the return on investment in Salesforce. And underneath that, we have those other 2 trends, change intelligence, which I've been talking about a lot, and DevOps. So those 3 trends together are what I see as the big implementation trends. And they are being driven by Salesforce's increasing penetration into organizations. More and more as Salesforce is becoming strategic, it's being that critical central source of customer data. And therefore, people are having to increase the level of professionalism, the level of rigor they are putting around their change to Salesforce, at the same time as accelerating the changes they're making. Which is why we're seeing the Center of Excellence, Change Intelligence, DevOps as 3 trends growing very, very quickly and being talked about more and more in the ecosystem. So if you've not heard of these terms before, this is your chance to actually dig in and start to understand what they mean, so that you're actually on the front foot when people start talking about it, rather than in meetings scrabbling around trying to understand what people are talking about. So let's think about how these affect your career and how you make career changes. So, I mean, not everybody wants to be a CIO, but if we think about the career progression going from admin through developer, business analysis, through to architect, to platform owner and CIO, then let's think about each of these different roles, and then what of those 3 implementation trends are most valuable and what they need to be worrying about. The other way to think about this is if you're an admin or a business analyst, you need to worry about what your platform owner is worried about, what your CIO is worried about. If you're trying to get budget for the next initiative, you're trying to get budget for the next project, you need to be talking in terms that they think about. So again, even if you have no aspirations to become a platform owner or a CIO, it's still useful to understand what they're worrying about. So let's start, first of all, with the admins, developers, architects, and business analysts. Change intelligence is really where they're worried about things. The admin, even though you think about an admin as just, oh, all I'm doing is making changes to metadata items, you are an important part of that change intelligence cycle. If you're in a big team, you may have business analysts, developers, and architects around you, and therefore those people are taking on different roles. If you're a solo admin, you have an admin hat, you have a developer hat, you have a business analyst hat, and you have an architect hat. So change intelligence is critically important to you. When I think about DevOps, it's really focused as the developer, but also the architect. Obviously, the developer in terms of making changes, but the architect in terms of solutioning and thinking about how those changes are going to go and land in the overall landscape of not just Salesforce, but Salesforce and the related systems. And if I'm thinking about the center of excellence, then the people who worry about that are the architect, the platform owner, and the CIO. They are worrying about leadership, governance, change management, tooling, metadata management, security, architecture. And these are just some of the pillars that sit underneath that center of excellence. And they're worrying about those, so they're driving up the return on investment in Salesforce. Again, if they have multiple orgs, they're trying to make sure that they are getting consistency across those orgs. Anything they discover that's working well in one org, they can replicate it in another org, and they can coordinate that. And what you'll notice there is the architect has been involved in each of those different areas. So the architect is pivotal. So if you're an admin, then the route could be admin through developer to architect, admin through to business analyst, and then from architect up to platform owner. So when you start thinking about your career planning, you need to think about it in terms of change intelligence, DevOps, and the center of excellence. So the obvious question is, where do I find more information and where can I get some training on all of this? So there are some resources there. Clearly Trailhead. So Trailhead has now got, obviously, it's been supporting the admin for years, but now you'll find way more training for architects. So you've got admin.salesforce.com for admins. If you go to architect.salesforce.com, then you've got a lot more architect-related content, but also some of the Trailhead courses are relevant to that, but also the architects are developing their own more in-depth architecture courses. Also in Trailhead, you'll find business analysis, and so business process mapping, requirements capture. So there's Trailhead is starting to be built out with a lot more training material for business analysts. Obviously, when we start thinking about certifications, there's obviously admin certification, there's the architect certification, B2B, B2C, enterprise solution architects. But we're also in the future, there's a business analysis certification coming out next year. There's obviously user design certification. So again, don't think of stopping at Trailhead. Think about those certifications that will push you harder, but will also then give you the validation that you've got some skills in that area, you've got some expertise. As I said, architect.salesforce.com is a great place to go in for some of the architect type resources. We've developed a whole ton of training content around change intelligence at academy.elements.cloud. Again, as with all training material, completely free, very Trailhead style in terms of the way it's been written. But again, it should help you understand how change intelligence works, but also how change intelligence feeds into DevOps. When we start thinking about DevOps, DevOps Launchpad was developed by Gearset. Again, free training materials, some fantastic stuff there around the DevOps cycle. And we're collaborating with them in terms of making sure that the change intelligence and DevOps piece connect between the Academy and DevOps Launchpad. And finally, I talked about the Center of Excellence. If you go to elements.cloud/COE, There's a sort of white paper there talking about the Centre of Excellence roundtable, but also those 13 pillars of the Centre of Excellence. So there's no shortage of training material out there. Obviously, if you get stuck, then talk to me. There are my contact details, ian@elements.cloud, or hit me up on LinkedIn. So to summarize this, Salesforce DevOps is actually the innovation engine. It's driving pace change faster. Time to value requires you to focus that DevOps, and the way to do that is combining both change intelligence and DevOps. That's the way to accelerate time to value. That's the way to accelerate the return on investment from Salesforce. We're seeing that in customer after customer. We're seeing consulting partner after consulting partner adopting these principles and getting fantastic results. So again, thank you for joining me for this short session. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or ask more questions, please, there are my contact details. And enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you so much.